There's this great story in the Brothers Karamazov. The atheist Ivan is torturing his younger brother Alyosha, who's a monastic novitiate, about religion and dogma and God. And in this story, Christ comes back to earth, to Seville in Spain, at the height of the Spanish Inquisition, and he reappears and he's doing miraculous things, and the Grand Inquisitor, who runs the Spanish Inquisition, promptly has him arrested and throws him in prison. And he comes to visit him at night, and he says, look, you were here 1,500 years ago, and you were perfect, and you put a moral burden on human beings that was way too great for anyone to carry, and it's taken us 1,500 bloody years to cobble together something out of your insanely positive example that normal human beings could live with, and we finally got it a little bit under control and dampened it down, and here you are back again, like setting up an impossible example for people. We just can't have that. We're going to do you in tomorrow. And Christ listens and is not particularly upset by all appearances about what's happening. And then the Inquisitor, who's an old man, gets up to leave, and when he leaves, Christ stands up and kisses him on the lips. And the Inquisitor turns white with shock and then leaves. And when he leaves the door open. And that's the brilliant part of the story, and that's what made Dostoevsky such an amazing genius, I would say, is even though he could write a critique of the Catholic Church, let's say, the Christian Church, as powerful and as intelligent as the Grand Inquisitor, he also noticed that the dogmatic structure of the Church still left the door open for the divine individual.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Pinedo Brothers podcast. I'm JP. My brother Peter is not actually with us today. He is away at Bulk. That is officer training camp. I think they call it Hero Squad.
Now, if you'll excuse me, they're putting me in something called Hero Squad.
No, all levity aside, it's a real thing. This isn't a Arrested Development joke. He's out learning how to defend our country a little better. But we have a great guest. You're not stuck just listening to me talk the whole time, thankfully. You've got someone way more qualified to be speaking. My good friend from high school that is actually a university professor at University of Houston downtown, Paul Fortunato. Thanks so much for joining us today.
James, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Just a little bit of background on Paul. Let me share my screen. I'll just give a little bit more background. Associate Professor of English at the University of Houston downtown, where he teaches a wide variety of literature and composition courses. His specialties include 19th century British literature and drama, as well as aesthetic theory and post-secular theory. He received his PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago. His publications include Modernist Aesthetics and Consumer Culture and the writings of Oscar Wilde witticisms. That's one of Paul's specialities, as well as articles on literature and aesthetics on interfaith dialogue. So Paul, thank you so much again. We're super excited. I wanted to talk to you, Paul, because Peter and I started a new series where we're trying to understand what our story is. In this day and age, our story is under attack. At least that's what we posit, is the Western story of is being seen through the lens of it's all evil. It's all some sort of paternal, the patriarchy keeping the downtrodden. It's a story of how power is what motivates us. But what Peter and I posit is that that's not the case. We have a rich history, and as artists, we come at it trying to understand what that story is through art, through the lens of art. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about one of my favorite books, Brothers Karamazov, because I believe that we can learn quite a bit about what our story is, maybe even where we're going as a culture, through Brothers Karamazov. So I'm hoping you and I together can understand why this book is important, or maybe, hopefully, it is important. If so, why? What you're actually going through this in a course of your own right now. Everyone, I hope that you're able to check out his YouTube page. It is totally worth the visit. You can see quite a few great playlists here. We've got the Toolbox for Christian Intellectuals, which is what he's going through right now, and
that's the current one. Yeah,
the Brothers Karamazov features very heavily in this. So, Paul, what drew you to Brothers to begin with?
I think as I was growing up and I was in college, Dostoevsky is my favorite writer. He transformed my life. When I was an undergraduate, I was a devout Catholic trying to figure out how my Christian faith fit with humanistic studies, and I was an English major, and Brothers Karamazov is it's my favorite, but actually I think maybe it's my second favorite. But it's got so much great material in there. And I mean, the three brothers are a kind of an array that we can kind of think about our own culture. And I think Dostoevsky was doing that himself, where you have, Alyosha, who's the devout Christian but struggling, and then who's also being kind of pushed out of the monastery into the world by his spiritual leader. You got Ivan, who's the rationalist, but he's also totally searching, really reluctant to commit to any idea, and Father Zosima even sees that. And then you have Dmitri, who is magnanimous but full of desires and full of passion, but cannot control them, and this leads to all kinds of violent outbursts. And then of course you have the horrible father, he's horrible, but and then you have even the half brother, Smerdyakov, who has bought into Ivan's rationalism to a totally nihilistic degree where he can justify murder and everything. So anyway, it's these characters dialoguing, talking back and forth, listening to each other. Alyosha kind of, being the Christian who's hearing these things and like trying to make sense of them. And Dostoevsky, through this voluminous work, in a way, someone said that why did Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and these Russians write these humongous novels? And in a way, they're like their version of philosophy, because you could write it as a kind of treatise, like a St. Thomas Aquinas or some modern philosopher, but this is a kind of like Platonic dialogue. I mean, it's like that's what it is. I mean, it's super rich.
I think a lot of cultures have been able to do that. They incorporate philosophy into their art. It's all interwoven. And that's something that actually drew me to film as well. I think that's a medium that could really be mined for philosophy. You see some of that, the great directors already do that, obviously. But Peter and I are aspiring to obviously be at that level of the great directors. And that's how we want to get there, is talking about philosophy through our art. But so I love that insight on it. I want to answer a couple of, so people have come to me saying, why should we read this book? Like that, everyone has 4 different names. All they do is they talk. There's so many, wonderful friends that I have that do not see the value in this book. How would you, if you were going to try to convince someone to read it though, what would you say? I know this is an off the rails question for you because, it seems obvious at least, but what would you say?
Well, that's a hard question because it's a heavy lift. I mean, literally. And
yep.
The thing is, it also takes practice, because I've read several Dostoevsky novels and Tolstoy, and once you get a few of them under your belt, it really goes quicker. But it's a significant lift, but it pays off because, and you need to read every word. I mean, you can kind of get excerpts and get some richness, but Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and these other guys wrote these humongous novels on purpose, because how do you get into the depths of the human soul? I mean, you in a certain sense you can do it in a short story, and you can certainly do it in a poem. Like poems can do that, but a short story can't quite do it, or even a film, because a film, that's only like an hour and a half or 2.5 hours. Like it can do it, but a novel does it in a different way, because you're with it for like 100 hours.
Yes.
And you're like, and you're going over the story, and your memory's going back and forth, and like, and making those connections and building up a kind of accretion of material, so that when Dostoevsky puts you with this humongous dialogue between Ivan and Alyosha and about the Grand Inquisitor, where Ivan is making these very deep and intense arguments against God and against the church, and but you had to be prepared for that, and in order to really get the depths of what's going on there and the depths of how Dostoevsky is able to kind of answer that without there's no like one simple answer. The whole novel is the answer. Mm-hmm. So or the moment where Ivan finds himself sitting face to face with the devil, and it's like this frightening, terrifying moment. But it's been building up, and you've seen like the various conversations that Ivan's been having that's been putting him where this becomes something that actually makes sense, where he is confronting the devil, and this is actually going to push him over the edge, where he's going to kind of lose his rationality. He's going to go a bit mad there. So you can't do that in a short work, and so the novel form is necessary in order to go to these places where Dostoevsky wants you to go.
That makes complete sense. I want to get back to what you were saying about how you can't even do it in a movie, an hour and a half, 2 hours, even 3 hour long movie. It's hard to get to that depth of human drama, because I think that this is an unusual time for for storytelling, that we can actually get there through film. But I want to get back to what another thing you had said is how the discussions or the conversations that are being had here in these books, there's just page after page of just intense conversations going on between the brothers, between the father, between Father Zosima. When Father Zosima talks about his childhood, that's intense. Oh my gosh, like there is so much intense conversation going on. I think something that a modern reader might have as a stumbling block is it is all talking. There are some actions going on, but the engine that pushes this story forward is really conversation, would you say?
Yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah, there's really just one action, and Dostoevsky gives us a very dramatic action.
Yes,
the murder of a father.
Yes,
and then the trial and everything, but it's just really one main action. Yeah, so you've got to have a lot of patience in order to kind of let it percolate there for you for all those hours of reading.
But something he does so amazingly, and Peterson, we're both big admirers of Jordan Peterson.
Absolutely.
I very much admire what he's been doing, and what he brings up so well when he talks about this book is how Dostoevsky is able to. The way I internalize what he says is not judge. He's able to say, well, Ivan is right, and Father Zosima is right, and Alyosha is right, and even the terrible Father Karamazov is right. Like they're all, when he's speaking in their voices, they're all right. He's able to not judge each character, and he's able to actually humanize even the most despicable, which, the father character, he describes him. It's so vivid how he just, his teeth are missing and he's like is salivating on himself. Basically, it's just so vivid. And yet when he speaks in his voice, that voice is strong enough to actually defend his actions. That's the thing. Like, nobody ever wakes up saying, I'm going to be an evil villain today. and in Dostoevsky, sometimes in art, they do that. in I guess, subpar art, maybe. But Dostoevsky never has that. Even the evil characters wake up and they're living in the world where they're the hero. And I admire that so much about this man, about this artist. I read this book because Jordan Peterson had it on his list. I'd never read any Russian literature before.
Oh, wow.
And I was blown away by how I couldn't tell what Dostoevsky was actually thinking. How does someone, like, as an artist, that is so, I admired that so much, to be able to not to hide the ball, so to speak.
Yeah, and as an English professor, it's not the same, but I try to hide what I think when I'm presenting Aristotle's thought, or Aquinas, or Foucault, or Nietzsche. Like, I'm not saying like this guy's right or this guy's wrong. I'm just trying to present it in a very serious way, and taking everything that they say seriously. I mean, obviously, well, I'm always interpreting and understanding things the way, and I'm choosing what I'm presenting as well. So there is obviously some interpretation by me, but
Absolutely.
but Dostoevsky and great writers, and what I've read, I'm not an expert on Dostoevsky, but I've read something that when he wrote these novels, he had his sketch of the story, and this actually was sketched out to be like the first of a trilogy, but he unfortunately died.
And this
right
was supposed to be the one that was the least, like, remember he says it in the introduction, like, this is the first, it's not very good, but we have to start somewhere, right? And then he
First
ups and dies, and
right,
this not so very good one has turned out to be one of the best novels of all time. How's that for irony?
I know, yeah. But when he writes the, I guess, whatever it was, that he didn't know how it was going to end. And so, and he tried to respect each character. He created the humanity of the character, and he tried to respect the character's freedom in a certain sense, like just to sort of see where does this art, and that's the way an artist often works, like a jazz artist or a musician, like they're kind of waiting for that inspiration for the next, where's this thing going to go? And yeah, I mean, to create that sense that you felt of, wow, I don't know where this is going. And even the narrator doesn't seem to know where it's going, because he didn't know when he was writing it in a certain sense. And yeah, I mean, like there's another great novel which I just read last year called The Idiot, where I won't tell you the ending, but it ended in a way that Dostoevsky did not, in a certain sense, want it to end. But that's sort of the way the characters developed, and naturally. And so he kind of, was honest with his own art to kind of let it sit that way.
I have that book sitting on my shelf. I have so many books sitting on my shelf that I want to read, but that's towards the top of the list. Because yes, I can't wait to read that, The Idiot. I think I think it's going to be even more, or at least just as much illuminating as Brothers Karamazov. But that's saying a lot. Paul, I wanted to ask you a few questions about I've been listening to your lectures that you've been giving. Thank you so much for putting them out there on YouTube. This is something that the viewers are going to be treated to if they do watch your lectures, is how positive you are. How you see this age with, and I'll admit it, I can be a little negative from time to time. I remember my sister was over this weekend, and she was saying, sometimes you just rant a little bit. You just go off and rant, and I said, okay. So I am prone to rant about what's going on that might not be, in my mind, the most positive of things happening, and there's a lot. But something that you say in your lectures quite often is, well, it comes through, is that you have a lot of optimism about this age. Something that you say is,
yes.
And I'm going to be paraphrasing a little bit, but you say refuse outrage and accept the difficult hope. And so when I hear that, when I hear you say that, the contrary side of me comes out and says, well, aren't there some things worth being outraged about, Paul? Like, there's a lot going on here. And how can we, like, there are some things that shouldn't be happening that are happening.
Yes.
How would you respond to something like that?
Well, one thing is that I'm convinced that outrage is a cop-out, because it's a cop-out that lets us off the hook. There's certain I mean, if we were in Nazi Germany or Nazi Poland, where like people are being, carted off and being incinerated by the millions, I mean, well, there you have no choice but to be outraged. And we have comparable things but different things of abortion and of horrible atrocities against the right to life, but we have nothing like Nazi Germany. Or the Soviet Union, and the outrage, I guess I kind of see it. It's kind of like I'm sort of stroking my own ego and letting myself like be righteously angry. But there's so much, but that's distracting me from the work that I need to do. Like, look, don't sit there and like moan. There's so much you can do, and engage both the Christians and let's marshal our forces, and the non-Christians. I mean, the non-Christians, unlike in the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, are generally like good people who we need to engage, and no one's talking to them except yelling at them. And that's just it confirms them in their own anger against Christianity. And so it's this totally unnecessary divisiveness. Like, if we just kind of settled down, Christians could do so much more work, I think, in this culture. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. And as I was internalizing what you were saying and then trying to formulate a question based off of it, I thought there could be kind of an interesting comparison in how outrage is dealt with the three brothers, with when you look, especially with Maita and Alyosha, where the military brother and then the hermit brother, the brother that was off in the monastery, at the beginning of the book. Alyosha seems to be able to take he's outraged a lot by a lot of the things that happen, and yet he always has a soft word to reply to it. What's that old proverb? A soft word can break a bone. Alyosha gets so much further than all of the military brothers' bluster can take away with his soft words. And I was wondering if that's kind of what you're saying. I think I'm understanding what you're saying correctly is, yes, I mean, there are things that we should oppose, but maybe we don't scream and yell about them when we oppose them.
Yeah. Well, I think Alyosha is a great example, both in that he talks essentially to everybody. Well, he has extended conversations and respectful, even with his father, who has mistreated him and his brothers, and is in some ways a despicable figure. With Ivan, who's like trying to like convert him to atheism, and yet he's engaging it with Ivan and listening to him at length, and Dmitri like trusts him so much because Alyosha clearly loves him so much, and then at the end, he builds culture. He gets a group of young boys, and he gives them formation, and they bury their friend who's died, and he teaches them the lesson of like, let's build this culture, and like there's this hopefulness like to the young and to the future, and certainly Zosima, his spiritual mentor, has trained him and is now sending him out, like, get out of the monastery, go into the world. You've got to get out there with your brothers, and that's what he does.
That's a perfect, thank you for mentioning the speech that Alyosha gives, because something that I jotted down when I was listening to your lectures is attract people with beauty. That the phrase that you say when you say attract people with beauty. And that's obviously, as an artist, something that's very compelling. It's a very compelling mandate for me. And speaking of beauty, I thought it would be okay if we could read the speech that Alyosha gives to those boys, who, as he's kind of offering them formation. If you don't mind, I'll just read an extract of that.
Sure.
Wonderful. So Alyosha speaking to the boys. The boys stood round him, and at once bent attentive and expectant eyes upon him. And this is just for a little bit of background. They had just buried, a very dear friend of their group. It's a very somber time. It's right at the end of the book where a lot of bad has happened, like a lot of pain and suffering. I mean, this is not a light novel. There's a lot of suffering here. Boys, we shall soon part. I shall be for some time with my two brothers, of whom one is going to Siberia and the other is lying at death's door. But soon I shall leave this town, perhaps for a long time. So we shall part. Let us make a compact here at Alyosha's stone, that we will never forget Alyosha and one another, and whatever happens to us later in life, if we don't meet for 20 years afterwards, let us always remember how we buried the poor boy at whom we once threw stones. Do you remember, by the bridge? And afterwards we all grew so fond of him. He was a fine boy, a kind-hearted, brave boy. He felt for his father's honor and resented the cruel insult to him and stood up for him. And so, in the first place, we will remember boys all our lives. And even if we are occupied with the most important things, if we attain to honor or fall into great misfortune, still let us remember how good it was once here, when we were all together, united by a good and kind feeling, which made us, for the time we were loving that poor boy, perhaps better than we are. My little doves, let me call you so, for you are all very like them, those pretty blue birds. At this minute, I look at your good dear faces, my dear children. Perhaps you won't understand what I'm saying to you because I often speak very unintelligibly. But you'll remember it all the same and will agree with my words sometimes. You must know that there is nothing higher and stronger and more wholesome and good for life than in the future, than some good memory, especially a childhood memory of home. People talk to you a great deal about your education, but some good sacred memory preserved from childhood is perhaps the best education. If man carries many such memories with him into life, he is safe to the end of his days. And if one has only one good memory left in one's heart, even that may sometime be the means of saving us. Perhaps we may even grow wicked later on, may even be unable to refrain from a bad action, may laugh at man's tears, at those who say, as Kola did just now, I want to suffer for all men, and may even jeer spitefully at such people. But however bad we may become, which God forbid, yet when we recall how we buried Alyosha, how we loved him to his last days, and how we've been talking like friends all together at this stone, the cruelest and most mocking of us, if we do become so, we'll not dare to laugh inwardly at having been kind and good at this moment.
That's so great.
It's something that I think about often, actually, how, because it inspires me as an artist, where if you can access, there is that in all of us. There is a good memory in all of us. I strongly doubt that any one of us has grown up and doesn't have one thing to hold on to. And if that person is out there, I maybe it'd be a good idea for me to pray for that person. But it's if we can access that higher nature through our pursuit of what is beautiful, like you were saying, attract people with beauty, that brings so much more out of this world, out of our circle, out of those that we're talking to, than shouting or being outraged.
Yes. Yeah. The thing that I'm thinking of, I guess one of the boys, I think he said that I want to suffer for the world, or I want to. I think he even said that he envied the boy who died.
Don't remember that.
I'm not sure, but yeah, and the desire to do something, to suffer for something worthwhile and dignified, that's an absolutely essential human need. And because suffering, as Jordan Peterson points out, it's going to come no matter what. The world is full of suffering. Everyone's lives has a big amount of suffering in it. But as a Christian, and like these boys, we can turn that around, and we can look to make our suffering redemptive by uniting it to Christ's cross, and by suffering for the good. I was hearing this story of a character. I'm reading Rutger's book, Live Not by Lies, and he interviews a guy who grew up under communism in the Czech Republic, or I think it was Slovakia, and how this man, was arrested by the KGB because he had been, promoting Christian thought and doing reading groups and study groups. And he's going to spend 13 years in prison, or he doesn't know how long, but it ends up being 13 years. They have him in the back of the car, and the man begins to laugh, and the KGB agents are kind of upset, like, why is this guy laughing? But inwardly, he's thinking kind of what this boy's thinking, like, I'm able to suffer for the good. Wow, what an awesome thing in a certain sense. Like, that's the Christian idea. Like, it's a privilege to suffer for Christ, and in a certain sense, like our moment now. That's one of the reasons I'm optimistic. is that Christians are not comfortable. We're going to suffer a little persecution. We're going to suffer a soft persecution, and thank God it's not a hard persecution like it was under the Soviet Union, but it's very manageable in a certain sense. Like, you might lose your job, or you might not get the promotion, you might get mistreated at work or in the university. You're going to have to put up with slight oppressions and like get hated by certain people because of your positions. That's good for us as Christians. We need, in a certain sense, that bite of the cross to toughen us and to discipline us, or so we can discipline ourselves, so Christ can discipline us. In a certain sense, maybe in this country and in other countries, previous generations of Christians were too comfortable and had it too easy in a certain sense. I mean, obviously, everyone's free. So, like, Christianity is going to flourish no matter where it is, in good times or in bad. But I think now is a really good time. I think now, and in the West and in the United States, we still have freedom. We still have religious liberty. I mean, it's being curtailed here and there, but fundamentally, we are free. And like, anyways, that's what we need to act. We need to act now.
Yeah. Well, you're right. You and I can still have this conversation, and we can still put it on YouTube. We can still, like, that's something that's so amazing about our time, is you can go on YouTube and we can listen to your thoughts, and you've worked for decades to amass that knowledge, which you're sharing now with us freely on YouTube. And we can listen to Jordan Peterson or Dr. Brian Dimitrovic or all these different wonderful thinkers. McIntyre, we were talking about, they're all there, and we can learn without having to spend a dime. It's absolutely, it's a wonderful time for us to be able to take advantage of all of this. But I wanted to say, so if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that's why this time is better, because there is this soft persecution. It's better to be a Christian now than in the 50s, because we can suffer more for Christ. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's part of it. I think, number one, there's that the soft persecution is a kind of natural disciplining force for us, which helps us. Obviously, it might not help depending on your attitude, but with a proper attitude, it helps. And number two, it's actually kind of convenient, because it's better to be a rebel against the man. We're going to stick it to the man. Like, I mean, in a certain sense, that's kind of more fun, and it affords more creativity. Like, great creative writers often write a bit under duress, whether it's Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or Solzhenitsyn, and so we have a kind of, we're the opposition now. We're the resistance. I mean, I call my YouTube channel, one of the titles is The Arts of Resistance. Like, it's kind of a convenient place to be on the outside, so that we can, keep poking holes in the secular, status quo, because it's going to crumble. It's not stable. I mean, they have the narrative, they have the story, but it's full of holes and it's cracking. And like, that's a nice place for us Christians to be, because we can start poking those holes in it. And yeah, I mean, it's a room for creativity.
What I think about when you say that is, there is this, it's a popular t-shirt, was a popular t-shirt maybe a couple decades ago. It was Karol Wojtyła, then Karol Wojtyła, now Pope St. John Paul the Great. And he's all dressed in black with sunglasses, and he's like, he looks like he's almost like a secret agent, and it says like, on a mission from God, you know, where he's, and Carol Wotia, you know, Father Carol, when he was working underneath the thumb of the Soviet Union, he was not the Pope. He didn't wake up being the Pope. He was, you know, working to subvert an incredibly a superpower at the height of their glory, that was bent on destroying Catholicism. Like, that was one of their missions. And he was a bishop in Little Poland, or first he was a parish priest, and then he was a bishop in Little Poland, trying to work to subvert this. And how did he do it? He was not screaming and yelling. You pointed out, I think in one of your lectures, he didn't even get arrested.
Yeah.
He outsmarted them at every level.
Yeah, I point to him as a model. Another one of the archbishops, I'm not going to remember his name right now, was imprisoned, and because he was standing up as he should have done to the communists. Other bishops were imprisoned. Karol Wojtyła, a bishop of Krakow at the time, was careful. I mean, he opposed things. He pushed, but he didn't push too hard. He was strategic. He, like, when they prevented him from building one of the churches that they needed to build in this working class town, he said, "Okay, I don't need a church." He just went and said mass right out in the open, out in this frozen Christmas time mass. He'll just keep doing it, and then eventually they let them build the church. Like, he pushed, but he was strategic. He pushed also by culture, by writing plays, by writing poems, getting them published under the Soviet regime. He was able to publish these things, and you know, because you wouldn't have been able to publish directly Christian materials, but through the arts, through beauty, he did it, and he found spaces of freedom to foster this in his parishes, in his diocese, in trips out to nature. Natural beauty is a wonderful educational force that counteracts the evil. So he found it. He did philosophy. He came up with what is now called the theology of the body, which I think is going to be the main way to slowly disintegrate the effects of the sexual revolution, which we're still feeling the effects of everywhere. Like, the family, the sense of man and woman have all been decimated. But partly through John Paul's thought and others people's thought, we have these resources in the church, which we're just going to keep drawing on.
That's exactly what artists at this day and age should be doing, is drawing on, and that's what we're trying to do here, Peter and I. I hope that you don't mind if I bring up a quote that you said, and I'm sure I'm paraphrasing, but you had said something: stories are in songs and poems, in dramas and ritual. This is how we grasp our story, is through these means of expression. And that's something I think Father Carol did through his plays. He was a director as well. That's something that we see with Brothers Karamazov. There's a ritual through the Orthodox Church, through the a lot of it's baked into this story, that understanding of who they were through their rituals, and the symbolism that these rituals come with are so varied, and there's a deeper it speaks to a deeper meaning that we cannot actually express, and yet we respond to. And I'm wondering if perhaps some of that is why this book is important. Maybe that's why this story is able to tell us about who we are, is that it has it's built on archetypes, obviously, but it has these characters, it has these situations, it has this suffering within it that we all experience, that all our ancestors before us have experienced. And this is how a great mind and artist deals with the great struggle that is the humankind, the human experience. I don't know, maybe does that seem to be just mad rantings?
No. Well, a couple of thoughts come to mind, and I don't know, this connects with part of what you're saying. That Jordan Peterson puts it something like this, that our capacity to think, to reason, is nested in stories. And I think what he means by that is that we don't just process data like a computer or a robot. And we have various ways of knowing. We have our intellect, we have our body, we have emotions and feelings, and we react to beauty and so forth. And all of these things are embedded, especially in stories. And these stories have been repeated over and over again. They're the archetypes that Jung and Peterson analyze, and Christians have also analyzed. And so these archetypes, as you say, are in the novels. But there's also values, like a conception of what it means to be fully human in the stories. And in a certain sense, any story is already kind of a theological story, in the sense that it presents an idea of what it means to be fully human. Even novels which are explicitly atheistic, like I'm thinking of like Kafka, like The Metamorphosis, or Beckett, Waiting for Godot, where these people are like waiting for something and nothing ever happens, or Kafka, something's Kafkaesque when like things don't make any sense and like your whole life is absurd, like you're a cockroach. And even those stories have a story shape where the person is desiring the good and fullness. It's frustrated, like they're waiting for Godot. And in a certain sense, that play is an amazingly Christian. I mean, he was obviously an atheist, but there's a lot of Christian thought and material in that play. And then even more so, of course, in Dostoevsky, where you see like the fulfillment of a human's life and the good life in Alyosha, and even in the other brothers to some extent. And even in Grushenka, this like woman who's got all kinds of out of control situations in her life, but she's desiring the good and she's falling in love, and anyway, like there's all this image of the good life in these stories, which educates us, and then we want that. That's what these stories do.
Yeah, our soul rises to that ideal. I wanted to ask one last question here with, okay, Dostoevsky was writing in a Russia that was soon to die and be violently reborn in the Bolshevik Revolution, and then with the Soviet Union, and well, that didn't work out so well.
No, to say the least.
The deaths of millions of people kind of attest to that. But I'm eager to see what you think of this. My impression is that Dostoevsky saw where the nihilistic tendencies were headed when there was a lot of nihilism that was growing in Russia at this time, in the universities, when you can see it. That's where kind of the birth of the suicide bomber sort of was born during this time. That action is a direct reaction to nihilism. They follow. And my impression is that Dostoevsky was seeing that they were headed somewhere that probably was not that great. He was a little, I'm not sure if he saw the death of millions and millions of people coming, but I think he saw something that was not that great. So I guess it's a two-part question. Do you think that is accurate, that sense? And whether or not you think it's accurate, where do you see us headed? As our culture is we're headed somewhere.
Right. I think in this novel, and particularly in a novel called The Possessed, or also translated The Demons, Dostoevsky was predicting what was very possible at the time. Now, he was writing, this is 1880 or so, and the Russian Revolution, there was a first revolution in 1905, but then like the big one was 1917. It wasn't fate that was going to happen, but it was clearly in the works, and many people were working really hard to make that happen. And they're in the novel. I mean, like the kind of nihilistic Rakitin, and even the ideas of Smerdyakov, and even Ivan, his ideas are partly what's going to lead to this violent revolution, bloody revolution, and then like the complete oppression of Soviet communism for 75 years. That he saw that coming. He saw that was definitely possible and maybe even probable. And in The Possessed, in that other novel, he really predicts it. I mean, like, and you can even see like these groups of revolutionaries gathering and getting ready to like collect bombs. They could literally blow up society and like try and like atomize society and rebuild it as this completely utopian world. So Dostoevsky saw that coming. He saw that as at least as a serious possibility, as others had, like as Nietzsche in a certain sense saw it, and other people had a similar predictions. Well, Nietzsche literally predicted like, gallons of bloodshed in the 20th century. Very accurate prediction, unfortunately.
Very.
Now, the second part, where I see us going today, I'm going to lean on a book that I haven't read yet, but I heard the lecture by Ross Douthat, Catholic writer who writes for the New York Times. And I can't remember the name of the book, but it has the word decadence in it. And he basically says the West is a decadent society in the following sense. It is kind of culturally dead or moribund. Not completely dead, but we're not really generating new ideas. We don't have hope for the future. There's this kind of stasis. And on the other hand, there's immense, generally, wealth, unprecedented wealth in a certain sense. Like 100 years ago, anyone who saw like the kind of things that you have in your house and my house, even though we're not like rich people, like they would be amazed. And so I think we are not going to get either much worse or much better. They're just going to stay sort of stuck. And people are basically going to be okay. And they'll have their bread and cakes and circuses. Like people will have the basic things that we want, so that there won't become some kind of bloody revolution or some civil war, which some people are predicting, which could happen, but I don't see it, because I think people are basically satisfied. And so in a certain sense, again, this is a perfect place for Christians to be. It's sort of like a Pax Romana, like there's this kind of stasis, and the culture is stuck. It's not going to go forward. The progressive movement doesn't have anywhere to go. I mean, it's sort of eating itself. And so this is where we can, in a certain sense, do something that happened back in the early Christians' times, in the 100s and 200s after Christ, that in small communities, in our homes, in our churches, build up the culture, write the works of art, create beauty, create communities which foster beautiful things, and then the rest of society is going to look at the Christians and say, like, I want that. And that's what's going to convert people. Like, the ideas as well, but the lived lives of Christians and small Christian communities where children are happy and they're taking care of the old, and there's this joy, and there's like the rituals of processions and art and great books, is attractive. And people are atomized, people are lost, people are in a meaning crisis. They're looking for something. Not everyone's going to grab on it, but a lot of people are. like now is a great time for Christian intellectual work, artistic work. We've got to do it though, and like we can't wait.
That sounds like a call to action that we should leave people with, send them out to go and do it. That's something that Peter and I are working on, Paul. Our mantra for, I'm not sure if I've told you this in the past, but is we want to set out to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. And there's so much to be had. We are so excited in this day and age about long form storytelling, where you can put a 10-hour long story on Amazon or Netflix or Hulu or Peacock or your own personal on YouTube. You can put it wherever you want, but people are used to now consuming a story of that length, a single story of that length. And that's why I wanted to come back to that. Something like Brothers Karamazov, you couldn't do that in a 2-hour film. You couldn't do that in a 3-hour film. You couldn't reach that levels. You couldn't probably do it in a 4-hour film, but maybe in a 10, maybe in a 20-hour. And now these days, you can do that. There's a desire for that type of content. And the more that Peter and I work through story, the more we think, well, that's where we want to be. We want to be telling those 10-hour long stories, those 20-hour long stories, because there's so much there. We were just talking recently about the Battle of Lepanto. That is begging to be put into a good 10-hour long story. This right here, the Brothers Karamazov, maybe we'll need 30 hours for it, but it's something that is worth being told, and we can reach these levels of kind of the same level of intensity and pathos, and you can reach that level of emotional, the emotional heights that you reach there with that novel like that, with these long form stories. Do you ever watch those yourself? Do you ever binge watch TV?
I occasionally binge watch. I more often watch in series, but I love good series. I mean, just simple fun ones like The Mandalorian, or which actually has some really good stories in it.
I think so too.
Even stories which can enrich a Christian lens, so to speak. But then, I think you're absolutely right. In a certain sense, now is a great time because people are ready for that. They're ready for like the monstrously long work over a series. Just make it like a 10-episode thing, and then you can get into the depth that the novel can do. In a certain sense, I'm thinking they've done the Lord of the Rings, but now they can do like a 20-episode
The
one.
Silmarillion.
And they're going to do the Silmarillion. Yes, yeah. I hope Amazon does a good job. They're doing a series on based on the Silmarillion, but and you won't have to truncate or shorten the work in order to do it. Yeah, and so I think now is a great time for that work.
It's a wonderful time for it. The Silmarillion couldn't be done in anything but that, just like the Brothers Karamazov couldn't be done in anything like that. Well, I know we're running up against time here, so this is, I think, a good time to end it. I wanted to thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for jumping on and having a conversation with us. I hope you and I can be able to chat again in the future. Maybe we talk about, maybe picture of Dorian Gray or something Oscar Wilde-ish.
Absolutely. No, I would love to talk about that. Yeah.
Love it. Okay, great. Well, let's everyone please check out Paul's YouTube videos. The channel is called Paul L. Fortunato, right, Paul?
That's right, Paul L. Right.
And you look for it, you'll see a little tree. Paul's also a big fan of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Is the tree inspired by that, or what is the tree?
It is. It's one of the logos from from the Lord of the Rings material. Yeah, it's a Tolkien thing.
I thought so. The white tree. All right, everyone. I'm JP, and we will catch you all next time.